without aware we smoke our engines.
This is what it sounds like when a pilot tells a white lie. The small problem that Malcolm Waters, the captain of Cathay Pacific Flight 780, is referring to is that one of his plane's engines has stopped, and the other one is stuck on high power and will not slow down. The 309 passengers on board this plane don't realize it, but there is a very good chance that in a few minutes, they will end up crashing into the South China Sea. The only thing standing between them and that outcome is the skill and teamwork of the two Australian pilots in the cockpit. With every passing minute, the condition of their aircraft worsens. Can they make it to Hong Kong before their engines deteriorate entirely? This is a situation which the pilots were never trained for, and for which no standard procedure exists. This is the story of Cathay Pacific Flight 780. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Morning of April 13th, 2010. At 39,000 feet, aboard Cathay Pacific Flight 780 from Juanda International Airport in Surabaya, Indonesia, to Hong Kong. The new day was a pristine, abstract thing, visible only as a gradual washing out of the star-flecked blackness beyond the composite windows. Inside the Airbus A330-342, the atmosphere was one of placid, humming somnolence. In the cockpit, the mood was professional and calm. Captain Alan Ewan, a veteran with over 20,000 flight hours etched into the lines around his eyes, scanned the array of screens with a practiced, rhythmic gaze. His hands resting lightly on the side stick were steady. To his right sat First Officer Daniel Yap. Younger but highly competent, his focus divided between monitoring the systems and the vast, empty expanse of sky ahead. They were a good team. Their communication a shorthand built on mutual respect and shared routine. Another beautiful morning, Yap remarked, nodding towards the burgeoning light on the horizon. Can't complain, Captain Ewan replied, a faint smile touching his lips. Everything looks good. Fuel is right on track. TA into Hong Kong's 0750 local. Should be a smooth descent. The aircraft, registered BHLL, was a machine in perfect health. Its two Rolls-Royce Trent 700 engines purring with the deep, resonant thrum of immense, contained power. The first anomaly was so subtle it was almost missed. At 0612 local time, a tiny, almost imperceptible fluctuation flickered across the engine pressure ratio, EPR indicator for engine number 2, the starboard power plant. They continued for another minute, the silence in the cockpit now charged with a new, watchful tension. Then it happened again. This time, the EPR wavered more noticeably, and a corresponding, barely audible hiccup, a minute shudder, transmitted itself through the airframe. It was the kind of sensation a seasoned pilot feels in his bones before the instruments even confirm it. Engine 2. It's hunting, Yap said, his voice tight. Before Ewan could respond, a master caution chime sounded, sharp and insistent in the quiet cockpit. A new message illuminated the ICA screen in amber. ENG-2 thrust locked. Both pilots stared at the message, their minds racing. A thrust-locked warning was unusual. It suggested the engine's thrust lever resolver, the system that translates the pilot's throttle commands into engine power, had frozen. The engine wasn't responding to their inputs. Okay, Ewan said, his voice a model of forced calm. We have a problem with number 2. It's not responding. Let's run the QRH for thrust locked. Yap was already pulling out the quick reference handbook, his fingers flipping rapidly to the appropriate checklist. The procedures were their Bible, a step-by-step guide written to handle every conceivable failure. As Yap began reading out the steps, confirming throttle position, checking associated systems, the aircraft gave another, more violent shudder, and then the world changed. A new, terrifying sound ripped through the fabric of the aeroplane. A deep, guttural roar that was entirely different from the smooth hum of a healthy jet engine. It was the sound of metal being tortured, of catastrophic internal failure. Simultaneously, the entire airframe began to vibrate with a sickening, jarring intensity. On the ECAS, the parameters for Engine 2 went wild. The N2 rotation speed, the core speed, began to plummet. The exhaust gas temperature, EGT needle, which should have been in the green, shot upwards into the red line, pegging against its stop. Engine failure. Engine 2 failure, Yap shouted. The professional protocol momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer violence of the event. Captain Ewan's hands clenched the side stick. Confirm engine failure. Engine 2 severe damage. EGT over limit. The amber warning was instantly replaced by a glaring blood-red master warning. The ECAS now screamed its dire message. ENG-2 fail. In the cabin, the placid dawn shattered into chaos. The violent shuddering threw sleeping passengers against their seatbelts. Overhead bins rattled violently. A cart in the galley, not fully secured, broke free and crashed against a bulkhead. The deep grinding roar from the right wing was audible even over the scream of the remaining engine and the rushing wind outside. A collective gasp, punctuated by screams of terror, erupted through the cabin. The soft ambient lighting now seemed menacing. Illuminating faces contorted with fear. Parents clutched their children, their eyes wide with a primal dread. The aircraft was no longer a vessel of comfort. It had become a trap, shuddering and roaring its way through the sky. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Hong Kong Control, Cathay Pacific 780. Captain Ewan's voice was clipped, authoritative, but a strain of urgency was now evident. We have sustained a catastrophic failure of our number 2 engine. Repeat catastrophic failure, starboard engine. We are declaring an emergency. Request immediate descent and vectors for the nearest suitable airport. The response from air traffic control was immediate. The controller's voice strained with the weight of the message. Cathay 780, Roger Mayday. You are cleared to descend to flight level 250. Nearest suitable airport is Hong Kong International, 120 nautical miles to your north. Confirm souls on board and fuel remaining. Ewan nodded at Yap, who handled the radio while the captain focused on flying the wounded machine. Hong Kong Cathay 780, 309 souls on board, 12 hours of fuel remaining. The figure was a stark reminder of their predicament. They had enough fuel to fly to the Middle East, but their crippled aircraft was struggling to make it 100 miles. Flying the A330 on one engine was a maneuver practiced countless times in simulators, but no simulator could perfectly replicate the violent asymmetry of a real, catastrophic failure. The A330 was pulling sharply to the right, the dead weight and drag of the stricken engine acting like a massive anchor. Captain Ewan had to apply significant left aileron and rudder just to keep the wings level. The aircraft was sluggish, its climb performance annihilated. They were a wounded bird, bleeding altitude and speed. Engine failure checklist, Ewan commanded, his jaw tight with the physical effort of controlling the aircraft. Yap began the drill. Confirm engine 2 failure. Condition lever. Fuel cutoff. He reached up and moved the condition lever for the failed engine to the cutoff position. This action should have commanded the fuel oil heat exchanger, FOHE, to close the fuel flow to the engine, starving it and stopping the internal destruction. It was the fundamental first step in securing a failed engine. But nothing happened. The grinding, roaring noise from engine 2 did not diminish. If anything, it seemed to intensify. The EGT, already pegged in the red, remained there. The engine was still running. Or more accurately, it was still destroying itself despite being commanded to shut down. It's not responding, Yap said, a note of disbelief in his voice. The fuel cutoff. It's not working. This was the moment the serious, manageable emergency began its metamorphosis into a full-blown catastrophe. A jet engine is designed with multiple redundant systems to shut it down. The failure of the primary fuel cutoff mechanism was an almost unthinkable scenario. It meant the engine was receiving a continuous flow of fuel, which was being ignited in a combustion chamber that was, by now, likely filled with shattered compressor and turbine blades. It was a runaway furnace, a bomb strapped to the wing burning itself to pieces from the inside out. "Try the engine fire handle," Yuen ordered, his voice grim. "Pull it." The engine fire handle was the ultimate measure. Pulling it would not only command fuel cutoff, but also isolate the engine, shutting off hydraulic fluid, electrical generators, and deploying a fire extinguisher. Yap reached for the brightly colored, guarded handle on the overhead panel, pulled it out, and twisted it. A light should have illuminated, confirming the engine was isolated, and the extinguisher discharged. Nothing. The red EGT warning. "Hong Kong, Cathay 780, we have a severe situation," Yuen transmitted, the strain now palpable. "We have been unable to shut down Engine 2. Repeat, Engine 2 is uncontained and we cannot achieve fuel cutoff. It is still running." A stunned silence followed from ATC. The controller's next transmission was laced with a new grave tone. "Cathay 780 understood. All possible runways at Hong Kong are available to you. The airport is standing by for your arrival." The news spread through the cockpit like a chill. They were flying with an uncommanded, critically damaged engine that was essentially a lit fuse. The risk of a catastrophic fire or structural failure was immense, and growing with every second the EGT remained in the red. The extreme heat could weaken the pylon attaching the engine to the wing, risking the entire engine separating from the aircraft. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the flight attendants were performing a ballet of controlled terror. Senior purser Maria Santos, her heart hammering against her ribs, gripped the handset of the PA system. Her voice, when it came, was miraculously steady, a practiced calm woven over a foundation of sheer panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior purser speaking. The captain has advised that we are experiencing some technical difficulties with one of our engines. For your safety, we request that you return to your seats immediately and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. Please remain calm and follow the instructions of your cabin crew." She released the button and immediately began directing her team. "Check the cabin. Secure all galley equipment. Look for any signs of smoke or fire near the right wing." The crew moved swiftly, their smiles gone, replaced by masks of intense concentration. They checked seatbelts, stowed loose items, and scanned the windows for any glimpse of the right engine, though the view was mostly obscured by the wing. The passengers, wide-eyed and silent now, obeyed with the docility of deep shock. A man clutched a crucifix to his lips, his prayers silent but fervent. A woman held a photograph of her family, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. Back in the cockpit, the situation was deteriorating further. The asymmetric drag was immense, and Captain Yuen's arms were beginning to ache from the constant pressure on the controls. The aircraft's airspeed was decaying. They were descending, but too slowly for a safe landing approach. A modern airliner needs precise control of its speed and descent rate to land. With one engine producing uncontrollable, erratic thrust and immense drag, and the other engine at full power just to keep them airborne. That control was evaporating. "We're too high and too fast for a normal approach," Yuen said, his eyes flicking between the airspeed indicator and the altimeter. "And with this drag, we can't slow down without stalling. We're going to have to come in hot." A hot landing at a significantly higher speed than normal, was incredibly dangerous. It would require a very long runway, perfect braking, and a hefty dose of luck. The A330's maximum landing weight was a critical factor, and they were still heavy with fuel. They needed to dump fuel to get down to a safe landing weight, but the procedures for fuel dumping were complex, and in their current state, potentially risky. They decided it was a risk they had to take. "Let's start the fuel jettison," Yuen instructed. "We need to get our weight down." Yap initiated the fuel dump procedure. From the tips of the wings, streams of jet fuel began to vaporize into a fine mist behind them, a visible trail of their desperation. They were lightening the aircraft, but they were also burning precious time and distance. Hong Kong was getting closer, but so was the point of no return. For nearly 40 minutes, the nightmare continued. The A330 shuddered and groaned its way north, a wounded Leviathan trailing a plume of vaporized fuel. The uncontained engine continued to burn, a constant, terrifying presence. In the cockpit, the smell of hot metal and burning oil began to seep into the air, a sensory confirmation of their impending doom. Captain Yuan and First Officer Yap worked in a wordless synergy, their communication reduced to terse statements and acknowledged nods. They were fighting the aircraft, fighting the failed engine, fighting the physics that were conspiring against them. Sweat beaded on their foreheads. The physical strain on Yuan was immense. The side stick felt like it was fighting him, trying to wrench itself out of his grip. Finally, the sprawling coastline of Hong Kong emerged from the haze. The sight of land, of civilization, was both a relief and a new source of terror. The challenge was no longer just staying airborne. It was now about getting this crippled machine onto the ground in one piece. Cathay 780, you are cleared for an ILS approach to runway 07 left. The runway is 4,000 meters long. Wind is calm. Emergency services are standing by. They could see the fire trucks, their red lights flashing ominously along the sides of the runway. A stark reminder of the expected outcome. As they configured the aircraft for landing, another problem emerged. The high, unstable speed and the asymmetric thrust made it nearly impossible to deploy the flaps and slats fully. These wing surfaces were crucial for generating lift at low speeds. Without them, their landing speed would be astronomically high. "We can only get flaps 20, Yap reported, his voice hollow. A normal landing would use flaps 30 or even 40. Flaps 20 meant an even higher approach speed. "We'll have to take it," Yuan said, his voice gravelly with fatigue. "We have no choice." The final approach was a white-knuckle ride of terrifying proportions. The aircraft bucked and swayed. The airspeed indicator showed 230 knots, a speed typically seen during cruise, not on final approach. They were coming in like a missile. The runway, which usually looked welcoming, now appeared frighteningly short and narrow. In the cabin, the crew had taken their brace positions.
"Heads down."
"Stay down," Maria Santos yelled over the roaring din. Passengers buried their heads in their hands, braced against the seats in front of them. The sound of crying was now universal, a chorus of pure, unadulterated fear. The ground rushed up to meet them with terrifying speed. Captain Yuan's entire world had narrowed to the view through the windshield and the feel of the side stick. He was flying by instinct now, a lifetime of experience being channeled into these final, critical seconds. He fought the aircraft's desire to roll right, keeping the wings level with sheer brute force. The landing gear screeched as it made contact with the tarmac, a sound of profound relief and violent impact. They were down, but the battle was far from over. They were traveling at over 230 knots. Reverse thrust was their only hope of stopping. Yuan jammed the thrust levers for the good engine into full reverse. The roar of the port engine changing pitch was deafening, but the starboard engine, the Rogue, the demon that had haunted them for the last hour, was still running. Its thrust, though erratic, was still pushing them forward. When Yuan selected reverse thrust on the good engine, the asymmetric forces became even more extreme. The aircraft veered violently to the left, threatening to careen off the side of the runway. Yuan had to instantly cancel the reverse thrust on the good engine to maintain directional control. They had lost their primary stopping power. They were now a 200-ton projectile hurtling down the runway, with only wheel brakes and spoilers to stop them. The brakes, designed for normal landings, were instantly overwhelmed. The smell of burning brake pads filled the wheel wells and seeped into the cabin. Tires began to smoke, and then, one by one, to explode with loud percussive bangs. The aircraft shuddered and vibrated as the anti-skid systems fought a losing battle. The end of the runway was rushing towards them. The emergency vehicles flashed by in a blur. With a final shuddering lurch and the scream of tortured metal, the A330 ground to a halt. A cloud of smoke and dust from the destroyed brakes and tires enveloped the aircraft. They had stopped mere meters from the end of the paved surface. The flight attendants, shaking but disciplined, launched into the evacuation drill. Doors were flung open, inflatable slides deployed with a whoosh, and passengers, driven by a surge of adrenaline and terror, began to stream out onto the wings and down to the safety of the tarmac. The smell of smoke and fuel was thick in the air. The slides were steep and fast, a chaotic but effective exodus. Within minutes, all 309 passengers and 13 crew members were on the ground, being ushered away from the crippled aircraft by emergency crews. The right engine was a blackened, mangled mess. Several tires were shredded. The brakes were glowing a dull, cherry red. The investigation that followed was long and meticulous. The wreckage of the Rolls-Royce Trent 700 engine was transported to a specialist facility and painstakingly disassembled. The culprit was eventually found deep within the engine's fuel system, the fuel oil heat exchanger, FOHE. The FOHE is a critical component that uses engine fuel to cool the engine oil. The investigation revealed that a rare and unforeseen manufacturing defect, combined with a specific type of environmental contamination in the fuel, had caused the fine metal mesh within the FOHE to become severely restricted. This restriction created a siphon effect. Even when the fuel cutoff lever was moved, this siphoning action continued to draw fuel from the tanks and feed it directly into the burning core of the engine, bypassing all the shutoff valves. The engine was literally being force-fed, unable to stop itself from consuming its own internal components. It was a failure mode so subtle, so insidious, that it had never been predicted. The pilots of Flight 780 had done everything by the book, but the book had not accounted for this particular, diabolical flaw. Their inability to shut down the engine was not a failure of skill, but a failure of system design. In the aftermath, Cathay Pacific and Rolls-Royce issued urgent service bulletins and modifications to the FOHE units across the entire fleet of Trent 700 engines. Procedures were rewritten. The lessons learned from the harrowing ordeal of Flight 780 made every other A330 with that engine in the world a safer aircraft. But for those on board, the effects were more personal and enduring. Captain Alan Ewan and First Officer Daniel Yap were hailed as heroes, their incredible airmanship credited with saving everyone on board. They received the Polaris Award for outstanding airmanship, one of aviation's highest honors. Yet the accolades could not erase the memory of the shuddering controls, the screaming ECAS warnings, and the sight of the runway approaching at a suicidal speed. Many passengers suffered from post-traumatic stress, haunted by the sounds and sensations of that day. Some would never fly again. They were the human cost of a tiny, almost invisible metal defect, miles above the South China Sea. The story of Cathay Pacific Flight 780 is not just a tale of survival against the odds. It is a stark reminder of the incredible complexity of modern aviation, where millions of parts must work in perfect harmony, and where a single, tiny flaw can cascade into a life or death drama. It is a story of human skill pitted against mechanical failure, of procedure versus the unpredictable, and of a dawn that for 322 people very nearly became their last. Thank you for watching this complete video. Please like and subscribe our YouTube channel, Red Dot AV.